And we'll start. Yeah, good evening, all the participants. I would like to give a brief report of this 3 days international conference, international e-workshop on Kautilya Arthashastra. We have planned in the backdrop of where we have introduced Kautilya Arthashastra into MA Economics as a compulsory paper. In continuation that, we plan to understand comprehensively and holistically Kautilya Arthashastra. For that reason, we have planned a 3-day international e-workshop with eminent scholars in the field of Kautilya Arthashastra. And today we are going ahead towards valedictory session with eminent speaker and policy architect, chartered accountant, advisor, thinker, writer, and all together, Sri Gurumurthy ji, we have today to address in the valedictory session. So, with this brief report of this 3 days international e-workshop, I would like to invite our HOD Ma'am and Dean Professor Pushpa M. Savadarthi to welcome the gathering. I welcome you.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. Dignitaries of today's program, Shri S. Gurumurthy ji, Board of Directors, Reserve Bank of India, President of the program, Professor M.B. Alagawadi, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Karnataka, Professor Basavaraj Donor, Registrar, Central University of Karnataka, is a guest of honor for today's program. Organizing Secretary, Dr. Lingamurthy, all the participants, academia, and dear students. It gives me an immense pleasure to do this welcome address on behalf of the Department of Economics in particular and on behalf of Central University of Karnataka. But before doing that, I wanted to throw some insights to the guest speaker. Sir, this has been a very wonderful international workshop, and I'm very proud to say that all the academia, we made them to feel proud about our ancient glory. But then we have discourses on various aspects of Kautilya Arthashastra, and this workshop made the academia to think how we can restore back this lost glory in the present day Indian context, and what is the role of we teachers and the role of higher educational institutions. So that is a very good outcome of this workshop for your information, sir. And I take this opportunity to welcome Shri Gurumurthy ji, the chief guest of today's program, who is going to address, and we are all waiting eagerly for that, on my behalf and on behalf of Central University of Karnataka.
Madam, you are not audible. Maybe network problem you have.
Gurumurthy sir, you have to unmute your microphone. You please unmute your microphone.
I've done it.
Yeah, just a minute, sir.
I want to know whether you have to start or still some.
Just a second, sir. I request our Honorable Registrar, Central University of Karnataka, to address as guest of honor. Professor Baswaraj Donur, sir, please. Baswaraj Donur, sir. I'm sorry to say there is a network problem. He is unable to.
Murthy, am I audible?
Yeah,
you
no.
are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are
I think-
audible.
Yes, just now.
Yes, yes. So I got disconnected, it seems. So it is my pleasure to welcome Shri Gurumurthy ji for this valedictory program on my behalf and on behalf of the Central University of Karnataka for this valedictory program. I also welcome Vice Chancellor of Central University of Karnataka, Professor M.V. Alagawadi in his absentia, and Registrar Central University of Karnataka, Professor Basavaraj Donur, who is the guest of honor on my behalf and on behalf of the Department of Economics. I also welcome Dr. S. Lingamurthy, Organizing Secretary of this workshop, and also warm welcome to all the participants, senior academicians, and dear students from India and abroad who are actively participating in this workshop since the last 2 to 3 days. So once again, warm welcome to one and all. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity, Dr. Or to Murthy.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request our registrar, Dr. Baswaraj Donur, sir, to welcome our chief guest and address the gang.
Dr. Hello, am I audible, Satyamurthy?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lingamurthy. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to participate in this 3-day international e-workshop on Kautilya Arthashastra. Professor Sodat ji, Department of Economics and Dean School of Business Studies. Sir M.V. Alagawadi in his absence here, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Central Institute of Kalaburgi, Sri Gurumurthy, RBI Central Board Director, Dr. Lingamurthy, coordinator of this extremely important 3-day international e-workshop on Kautilya Arthashastra, and all my very dear colleagues in the School of Business Studies and business scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to participate in this wonderful academic exercise, 3-day international e-workshop on Kautilya Arthashastra. As I said, it has been a wonderful, academic exercise. As Madam in her introductory remark pointed out, the time has come for all of us to trace our past glory and to regain our past glory. India has so much to its credit in all walks of life. In all walks of life. And Kautilya is a symbol of Indian identity. And he was one great intellectual scholar that Bharat produced in the recent in the past, and who could Indian politics.
Honorable Registrar, you have to unmute your microphone, please.
Okay. Am I audible now? One on, madam.
Yes, sir.
Now you are audible.
Yeah. Sorry, I
ಇದು ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಜಸ್ಟ್
just a minute, sir.
ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡಿ
I was trying to say how Kautilya becomes an important political thinker and economist for today's world, especially India. And he has an extreme relevance for present day political and economic discussion that is going on in the country. And as I said at the beginning, Kautilya is a symbol of Indian identity. And many centuries ago, he wrote Arthashastra. And Arthashastra, as I understand, is not an economic treatise or economic book. It's also a political discourse. It's both a political and economic discourse. And Kautilya was one of the finest intellectuals that the ancient India produced. Ancient India produced, and it is very unfortunate that we have lost our living connection with our past. And now we have developed a tendency to question, to challenge, to problematize all that is past. But India has one of the oldest and richest civilizations in the world, and India produced eminent people in all walks of life, and Kautilya is one of them. And Kautilya also stands for self-respect. So Kautilya stands for self-respect, and he was one of the few intellectuals of the past who established Indian identity in terms of politics and economics. And he wrote one of the finest books in the world, which can be compared to any political treatise written by Plato and other Western thinkers and philosophers. So I'm very happy that the Department of Economics, under the able academic leadership of Professor Pushpa Sapati, has been able to organize this wonderful 3-day e-workshop on Kautilya's Arthashastra. And now, by organizing this wonderful shop, they have given an opportunity for all of us to rethink about our past and to rethink about Kautilya, and also to explore the possibilities of making Kautilya and his political and economic treaties become relevant to today's political and economic situation. I sincerely remember the help and cooperation extended by Professor M.V. Alagwadi, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Central University of Karnataka. With his help and direction, many departments in the university are able to organize a number of seminars, webinars, conferences, and so on. I thank him on behalf of the department and behalf of the university in his absentia. And he was to participate in this well-lit presentation, but these scattered remarks of mine, I thank the head of the department, the organizer of the conference, for giving me an opportunity not only to participate in this wonderful seminar, webinar or e-workshop, but also make a few observations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Before handing over to respected Sri Gurumurthy ji, I request Padmavati Naik to give his introduction. Padmavati Naik.
A very good afternoon to one and all present here. Is that audible?
Yes, you are audible.
I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the chief guest, Sri Swaminathan Gurumurthy, for today's valedictory program of 3-day international workshop on Kautilya Arthashastra. Sri Swaminathan Gurumurthy is a chartered accountant, corporate and legal advisor, political commentator, and a columnist and an eminent economist. Apart from being a professional advisor, he has also been a keen academician who worked as a visiting professor of IIT Bombay on Indian models of economy, business, and management. He's also a distinguished professor of legal anthropology in Shastra University in Tanjore. He's a vice chairman of a well-known strategic think tank in Delhi, that is Vivekananda International Foundation. He's also the editor of socio-political weekly Tughlaq in Tamil. He's a high-rated journalist for the investigative writings. He has campaigned against corruption at high places and he has been a powerful opinion maker in India in the domain of economics. He's also the Central Board Director of RBI, and he was consistently seen by the media as the most powerful person of India from 1992 till now. The Business Baron magazine related his knowledge of economics, finance, and accounts as outstanding. He is the 30th most powerful person in India, and apart from all these, is also very active in research. Mostly, his findings of the study was later supported by World Bank in its World Development Report. With this brief introduction, I would like to welcome you, sir, to the valedictory program of 3 days international workshop.
Sir, you are, please unmute yourself.
I'm delighted to be part of this international seminar to recall the great thoughts of one of the greatest intellectuals in the world, strategic thinkers of the world, military specialist, economic thinker, and also a person who thought of a normative society, a normative ecosystem. That is the most important contribution of Kautilya. In fact, surprisingly, I read about Kautilya in the Pakistan government's website about the history and culture of Pakistan. If any of you have an occasion to download it, you can see it. Now there is some problem about accessing Pakistan website. So in that, I read about the interface between Kautilya and Kautilya, product of his observation about what this country was and what the world was. And when he found that this country was too soft a country, too noble a country, too non-conflicting a country, to face a world of conflict, aggression, military, invasion, dominance, he changed the paradigm of our thought. This is the most important thing. He did not produce his thoughts in a laboratory. He produced his thoughts in an atmosphere where he was face to face with the challenge. In fact, the Pakistan government website says that when he met Alexander, he questioned him about the war ethics, which were not dharmic, which were not based on ethics, which was not based on, which was only aimed at victory. In fact, our war model never aimed at victory. It aimed at acceptance of the victor even by the defeated. So, when the victor wins against the defeated, he is supposed to offer the country back to the defeated person and ask him to be the ruler. This has been the tradition of India. And when Alexander was doing the reverse, he was taking over, massacring the people and looting, and he was only interested in establishing a power. This kind of paradigm was unknown to India. So, when Alexander ordered his arrest, Kautilya ran so fast that Alexander could not arrest him. This is the most important part of the essay on the Pakistan's culture and history, which I found in Pakistan website. The important point is that having come face to face with what the world is, the invasive world is, the aggressive world is, the violent world is, he tried to change the paradigm of Indian thinking. India did not have a regular army. The most important thing was we never needed a regular army. We needed an army only for law and order purposes. Virtually, we needed only police. So our Kshatriyas were called whenever there was disturbance. And simply because somebody had a huge army, he could not invade and conquer another country. And he has to notice the other day, I want to be the Chakravarti. So I am going to conduct one Ashwamedha Yajna. Anyone who attends the Ashwamedha Yajna has accepted my leadership. Anyone who doesn't accept, he has to face me. And a platoon of some 1,000 soldiers will walk around all the areas he wants to occupy. And anyone who stops that platoon wants to have a battle with him. And in that battle, if the person who wants to become the Chakravartin wins, he has to give the kingdom back to him. This is called Dharma Vijaya. So this Chanakya found was one of the reasons why we were not able to build an empire. An empire is built by acquiring territories and appointing your own people. So Chanakya moved away from the concept of Dharma Vijaya to what is known as Lobha Vijaya. Lobha Vijaya is acquisition. You acquire the land, you appoint even the same king as vassal king. He must be subordinate to you. And 3, you acquire even his wealth, not the personal wealth. In fact, what is known as Asura Vijaya, where you take over the entire people's wealth, loot and women, and destroy the conquered king's family. This was the practice of the world. This was never practiced in India. All the Indologists have come to one conclusion, that the Indian war models were noble and they never followed the Asura Vijaya. And the only king in India, you will be surprised to know, who followed the Lobha Vijaya principle was Emperor Ashoka. Emperor Ashoka was the only person who invaded without giving notice to the opponent, conquered him, destroyed him, killed 1,000 people, and that is why he repented. So Chanakya felt that this weakness in the Indian war ethics, war norms, was making India weak, and that is why people like Alexander could come and invade India. He theorized 3 things. 1, the state has to be a strong state. It needs an army. It needs treasure. And it also needs to acquire territories. This was never, before Chanakya, acquisition of territory of another king and ruling over him was never in Indian contemplation. In fact, the Indian war models, which has been very extensively researched by V.R. Ramachandra in his Hindu Rules of War, which is worth study by any history department in this country. He said, the person on an elephant cannot fight a person on the ground. A person who is on the horse, he cannot fight a person on the ground. A person on the elephant cannot fight a person sitting on the horse. These were all the rules. Anyone who drops the weapon is no more a soldier. Anyone wounded, no more a soldier. All these are non-combatants. Non-combatants were never disturbed. And this was the position right up to the 17th and early 18th centuries in Kerala, when the Zamori kings, when they fought the Portuguese, the Zamori king wrote the letter that this is our war model. We don't fight where the people are. We have a background where we can fight. Then the Portuguese asked him, are you asking for war or sports? This has been the war model of India for thousands of years. It is not one of those mythological models. This was a model in practice. This had to be broken by people who faced barbaric forces, and that included, in thinking, Chanakya, and it was later followed by Chhatrapati Shivaji. As a strategic thinker, he had to break all the rules of the modern rules of the morals of the war and take to guerrilla warfare, which was never an Indian model because we were facing barbaric forces. So when you assess Chanakya, Kautilya, you have to understand that he was a very keen observer of the world, and he positioned mind is the world. Unless you see him, he was not a theoretician. He was not just a book writer. He was a practitioner. So it is in this background you have to understand Kautilya, and I have given you the strategic background of Kautilya, and I will give you his economic thoughts, which I have studied in some depth, and I have also studied in depth the economic thinking of transcultural, trans-civilizational, trans-country economic thoughts, which I have studied, which I will now compare with what is Kautilyan thinking. You know, his economic thoughts and structure on which it was founded was normative. The most, please note this word, normative economic thinking was the foundation of Kautilyan economics. It was centered on ethics. Ethics meant dharma. Dharma, to say in simple words, you will not do to another what you don't want the other to do to you. This is dharma. If you don't want another person to slap you, you should not slap him. If you don't want another person to abuse you, you should not abuse him. You don't want another person to cheat you, you should not cheat. This is the simplest way of explaining dharma. So, Kautilyan economic thinking, economic architecture, economic rules were founded on normative thinking, centered on ethics. This is what is known as dharma. Dharma and ethics are together. Of course, it's a very huge topic. It cannot be captured in a small discussion. And normative means culture. Culture means collective. Collective means relations. Relations means society. This is the most important thing. Unless there is a continuum of this linking the man to the society, it is through culture, it is through relationship, it is an expectation as to how a man will behave. It is not that how he wants to behave. There is an expectation about how he will behave in a family, in the neighborhood, in the society, and there is a trade-off of duties and rights. This is the most important part of normative society. His theory of normative economics approximates to what is known as market economics as distinct from market society. Please note these two words. This has been in discourse for the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even 10 years, since 2008 in the Western Economic Guild. That there is a difference between market economics and market society. A market economics functions with the society. A market society turns the society into a market. It turns a family into market. It atomizes the individuals. There is no family, there is no society, and there is only an individual and the state regulated by rule of law, by fundamental rights, by human rights. There is no duties. You know, H.G. Wells, about whom all of us know, he was the one who expounded the Declaration of Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He sent a copy of his human rights document to Mahatma Gandhi and asked Mahatma Gandhi, why don't you endorse this? Why don't you support it? Mahatma Gandhi wrote a small letter. I will support you. The title of the declaration into Universal Declaration of Human Duties. He said, rights sans duties is destructive of the society, destructive of families, destructive of nations. I won't agree to that. While duty incorporates rights, my duty means the other person's rights. Parents' duties means the children's rights. Children's duties means the parents' rights. Teachers' duties means the students' rights. Students' duties means the teachers' rights. You know, Mahatma Gandhi completely changed the paradigm. But unfortunately, Mahatma Gandhi's thoughts were not accepted. It was only the H.G. Wells' Universal Declaration of Human Rights was accepted. So if you look at modern economics today, the Western economics is based on market society where the family functions on the base of market. With the result, today you have a Western world, particularly America. If you look at the scene, 55% of the first marriages end in divorce. 67% of the second marriages end in divorce. 74% of the third marriages end in divorce. There is no family. There are only 28% of the Americans who live with the couple of children at home. 49% of the 51% of the Americans do not lead what is known as a family life. With the result, the responsibilities of the families have devolved on the state. Please close your mic, please. The responsibilities of the families have devolved on the state as social security, because the parents are not taking care of the children, because the children are not taking care of the parents, because the informed and people are not taking care of the family. Family as an economic and cultural and social concept has collapsed. All the responsibilities have devolved on the state. With the result, today, if the future social security obligations of America, which it has incurred today, is rated at today's valuation, it is known as $66 trillion. This is the cost of destroying relationships and creating market society. So the West began understanding this only after 2005. In the year 2008, after the economic crisis, when the Asian economies bounced back, the Economist magazine wrote an article for the first time recognizing that we have built a market society instead of market economics. Because we have destroyed all the relationships, now the Asian economies, which are just market economies, they have not destroyed their societies, they have bounced back. This was astonishing comeback was the title of the cover page article which the Economist magazine wrote. Why I am saying all this? In India, none of this is noticed or discussed or discoursed or argued. There is no counter argument in India because we are blind acceptors of what the West produces in terms of what they mean for us. So it is very unfortunate. Economic sans relations, family or society is market society. Economics which works with the society, which works with the family, which works with the relationship is market economics. This is normal. Market economics will fit into Kautilyan Arthashastra, but market society will not. When we talk about human rights, when we talk about individual rights which overrides family, when we think about individual rights which will override the society, we are thinking not of market economics, we are thinking of market society. It is based on what is known as methodological individualism. I will explain a little later what is meant by methodological individualism. Methodological individualism says the society can be deconstructed by capable, skillful, thinking individuals, which means the society can disown its past, disown its traditions, disown its values. This is the idea of methodological individualism. See, in simple terms, pure market economics works with the family society relations. And market society works only on the basis of contracts. Even the husband and wife relationship is contract. The children parents relationship is based on contract. If you want, you can accept somebody as a parent and support. Otherwise, you can keep quiet. There is nothing which binds you to your parent. There is nothing which binds you to your children. And I was addressing a meeting in IIT Chennai Management Institute. About 350 or 400 students were there. I asked them to lift hands those who are not supported by family, those who have to borrow money, please, for studying, lift your hand. Out of the 350 or 400 people, some 10 or 20 people lifted their hands. I said, who are all supported by the families for study here? The entire audience lifted the hand. If I had asked this, out of 3 people who were supported by the family for higher education, there would not have been even 1 in or 2 in 100. There is no relate, there is no connect. So this unbridled individualism is the foundation of the contemporary market society, which works without relationship. A normatively disciplined society is what we call as dharmic society. Being not purely materialistic, it is neither capitalist nor socialist, with neither wealth nor power dominating people's life. This is the most important thing. Since there is a trade-off between rights and duties, I give up my rights in response to the duties which others give to me. So, in a dharmic or normative society, by interconnected institutions, whether it is the family, whether it is the neighborhood, whether it is the community, caste, whether it is the larger society, it functions on the principle of mutual trade-off of rights and duties. This is incorporated in the idea of dharma. That is incorporated in the concept of thinking, the Kautilyan thinking. How the state is unburdened in a normative society, two telling examples I'll give. Then you will know the economics that we discuss, that we think, discuss, and practice and teach has no relevance to the society. If I assume that all Indians who are earning disown their parents today, disown their grandparents today, disown the people who are dependent on them today, this is what happens in America. What happened? At least 50 to 60 crore people will be before the government offices for 2 square meals a day. This has happened in America, as a result of which people think they need not save. Savings rate is one of the lowest in America, and they don't want to put money in safe bank deposits. They put it in stock market, so stock market goes up. So if the family burden is taken over by the state, then individuals need not safely invest. They can put it in stock market, they can spend on themselves. Ultimately, the state will take care of them. This is what has resulted in what is known as the modern financial capitalism, which would never be permissible in any market economics which works with the society, based on norms, based on values, based on relations. This is the foundation of Kautilyan economics. So Kautilyan economics is not a dead economics, it's a functioning economics. It's a practical economics. It is the economics which works on the ground before our eyes, producing results. So we don't see it that way. We think economics is something which is to be seen only in a laboratory, which is unconnected to us. So actually, this trade-off has been beautifully explained in Mahabharata. Tyajat yeham kulasyarte, gramarte kulam tyajet, gramam janapadasyarte, atmarte prithvim tyajet. That is, for the sake of the family, an individual compromises his rights. Tyajas ekam kulasyarte, for the family. Gramarte kulam tyajet, for the village. He compromises his rights, gives up his rights. Gramam janapadasyarte, a village gives up its rights for the nation. Only person who doesn't want anything, he can give up the whole world, nothing binds him. And that is the person who seeks only God and nothing else. So, if somebody wants rights, he owes duties. Only if somebody doesn't want anything, he doesn't have any duties. This is the concept which is incorporated in the Kautilyan thinking. Just as social security is privatized in India, the social order is socialized. You know, we have 667,000 villages and towns. All of you are educated people. You know how many police stations we have? We have only 12,800 police stations. 668,000 villages and towns. Only 12,800 police stations. And most of them are situated in and near urban areas. There are, now we have seen newspapers which say the polling station is sometimes 20 kilometers with donkeys taking the polling machines. You have seen the photographs. There are places which are far away from police stations by 100 kilometers. But the crime rates in India are the lowest in the world, according to nationmaster.com, which compiles the crime data of all the nations in the world, and whether it is in terms of murder or in terms of death or in terms of theft or in terms of rapes, India is the lowest in the world. It's not because of police. It is because of relationships. Even the neighbor will correct me. I was born in a village. A neighbor has slapped me and corrected me. This is because the society is having a responsibility to ensure that every individual will be a harmonious part of the society. It is the family responsibility to ensure that the child will be a harmonious part of not only the family, but also the society, but also the country. It is not just the function of schools and colleges. It is not the function of policemen and courts. So the alignment between the family, society, and what social capital is the most part of Indian and generally Asian way of life, Asian economics. This social capital can be destroyed, but it cannot be created. What is social capital? Financial capital belongs to you. Intellectual capital belongs to you. Social capital belongs to the society. So this is the most important part of the idea of market economics, where the social capital, financial capital, and intellectual capital function together and are aligned. So you see now how in a relation-based society, the state is unburdened by the social security obligations which are made the burden of the state in the entire West. For example, United States, which has a $66 trillion bill on its head, against which it doesn't have one. It's all administered by families in India, by relations in India. It is not seen as a burden. It is seen as a duty. It is seen as a noble duty to take care of parents, to take care of grandparents, to take care of infirm people, to take care of unemployed people. No unemployed son is an unemployed citizen in India. The family may have problems, but still they will look after him. He will not be thrown on the road for some Narendra Modi to take care. This is what has produced what is known as social capital. Social capital has been able to do this. In the same way, the public order, the social order which is maintained in India, is also founded on this high principle of social capital, where relations, duties, mutual trade-off between rights and duties govern the social life. This is not something which will come within mathematical calculations. It cannot produce a laboratory can produce with accuracy. It is an empirical analysis. Actually, I have traveled across when the tsunami of globalization hit India. I was a corporate advisor. I used to be asked questions by corporate captains who were either my friends or my clients. What do we do at this point? Even I did not have an answer. I began traveling across the country from Ludhiana to Batala to Rajkot to Jamnagar to Morbi to right down to Thoothukudi. I have gone to 42 industrial clusters, stayed in each industrial cluster for 3 days, 4 days to know how these industrial clusters became such powerful drivers of manufacturing and employment. In fact, I used to ask this question to many audience. Which is the place with the highest per capita income in India? It is not Bombay, it's not Delhi, it's not Calcutta, it's not Bangalore, it's not Chennai. It is a place called Morbi in Gujarat, which has a population of maybe about 5 or 6 lakhs. I went to that, it had a population of 2.4 lakhs. 1.4 lakh people were employed. There were 1,200 diamond cutting units, 1,000 ceramic units, 1,100 textile units. And the only language most of them or almost all of them were unaware was English. No engineering college produced them. This was the case with Ludhiana. When I went to Jalandhar, I found they were manufacturing in 1993 cricket bats for Australian Cricket Control Board. That is the social capital of India. The entrepreneurial skills which the Indians have acquired is because of the community base. In a community, when one person does something, others copy it. Entrepreneurship becomes a movement. That is how the Patel community, the Gounder community, the Nodar community, the Naidu community, the Dalit community in Agra and Kanpur, they all became entrepreneurs, very rich people. This is because of relationships and social capital. Which IIT, which IIM, which research body has gone into the foundations of relationship as the basis for entrepreneurial development? So we have got to understand this. There is a huge, this has produced results. And we were told India performed well. It was a great spiritual society, cultural, literary, arts, music, and everything. But it was a failure in economics. This was the thinking right up to 1983. In fact, one of our economists even took pride in saying, because we were Hindus, we cannot grow. That is why we have Hindu rate of growth. This was 1978. Professor Rajkrishna said this. And that is why the concept of the nomenclature of Hindu rate of growth. But in 1983, Paul Bairoch came with his findings. He was mandated by the GATT to track the economic development of the world between 1750 and 1900. And he said in 1750, if you drew the map of global economic growth, China was first with a number 33% of the growth, 33% of the world's GDP, India with 35%. India and China dominated the world with 60% of the global GDP. And both of them crashed in 1900. China came to 6.2 and India 1.8. They never recovered afterwards. And so many French historians began writing, let us accept that in the 16th and 17th centuries, India and China had a much better standard of living. And colonialism issued out the race. Then the OECD countries constituted a research under Development Studies Institute headed by Angus Madison, who conducted 2,000 years of economic study and came to the conclusion, the same conclusion with which Paul Bairoch came to, that from the first year of the Common Era to 15th century, India was the leading economic engine of the world. 16th century, India and China became equal. 17th century, India overtook China. That is accepted as the most authentic economic history of the world today. So the entire idea that our old civilization did not produce results, that relation-based and social capital-based approach was not producing results, that we were poor by civilization and virtues, has been proved wrong. When I told this in the IIT students were not aware of this. That is why the IIT asked me to be the visiting professor to teach, not the past, but how our same model of life, culture-based, relation-based, our society base, our family base, normative way of life is functional. Even today, we are only not able to adjust our economic policies, economic thinking, economic approach, economic discourse, economic studies to align with our social capital. So, individualist approach is a product of Western civilization, where there was always a war between the collective, a powerful collective, whether it is the church or the state or the king, or till democracy came, dictators. Only the post-war West knew what was democracy, particularly Europe. They never knew democracy. And the entire Western social economic ideas were driven by one idea, one way, there is no other way, and this was known as the one-size-fit-all model. This one-size-fit-all model is completely contrary to the Asian approach, which is diversity. We can have, for example, the economic policies which are applicable in Tamil Nadu will never apply to Arunachal Pradesh, will never apply to Assam. So we have such extensive diversity. If you keep India on the one side and the rest of the world on the other, they receive more diversity here than the rest of the world put together. This is the case with most of the Asian countries. And so, which was recommended for the entire underdeveloped world by the United Nations in the year 1951 by measures for the development of underdeveloped societies, said, if you want to develop, you have to give up your philosophy, your way of life, your relationship. Otherwise, you will never develop. This was said in very plain terms. This is not the present day mean and lean United Nations. There was a powerful United Nations. And all nations began following that. There is no difference between capitalism and communism on that. They all said this is the only way, market is the only way, and there should no relationship. Everything is based on methodological individualism, which is common to communism. The only difference between communism and capitalism is whether property should be owned by a private person or by the state. It was a property dispute. There was absolutely no philosophic difference between the two, or the relationship of man with the society, with the family, or state, or with nature. This became globalization, where Francis Fukuyama came with his explanation that liberal democracy and free market are the foundation of Western civilization, and with this the West has won against the rest, and it is good for the rest to follow the West as the best, became the basis for globalization. And all the modern ideas are collapsing because they are not founded on firm values, on relations, on continuity. Colonialism lasted for 100 years, but everybody at that time thought this would be permanent. Capitalism lasted for 100 years. Everybody thought it would be permanent. It folded up. Communism came. Everybody thought it would be permanent. It folded up. Globalization came right in front of us. Everybody thought this is the only way. Economist magazine wrote an article last year, globalization is dead. It is because none of this is founded on continuity of human relationships. They are all broken pieces of thoughts which are fit for a context, useful for a context. But the context cannot determine the text. The text of human life is a continuity. You recall the past. You recall your great-grandfather. You recall your history. You recall the nation. You recall great people. You recall great literature. That's how human life is. So with the result, the one-size-fit-all model, that if you want to develop, you have to become like me. It is not just in economic policy, in your social policies, in your cultural policies, in your education, in your attitude, your morals, you have to become like me. This was the, in fact, I don't want to burden you more on this sociological aspect of economics. This was very, very clearly explained as the Western anthropological modernity, which is at work in economics. So this became the post-war World War economic thinking. It is a kind of economic monotheism and a global one-size-fits-all model. And this was developed by Karl Marx, Max Weber, the 1951 United Nations resolution, and globalization. This all became questioned. Weakening of one-size-fits-all model is the most important development of the last 20 years. 2001 terror attack on America was a fundamental turning point that the world cannot function only on economic model, that it requires to align strategic, defense, security, civilizational approach is also needed. You cannot have only market economics and market principles, financial, WTO is inadequate to deal with the world. The world needs security. So 2001 became the first turning point. And then financial crisis for which the current financial theories have no answer because it has changed the behavior of the humans. Savings is an important thing, but that is not considered to be important. Spending is considered to be important. A nation which spends becomes prosperous, and the nation which saves is not prosperous because spending based economics has become the individualist economics. It doesn't care about families, it doesn't care about relations, it doesn't care about the future, it doesn't care about the nature. Because the restraint on that I don't buy this, that I don't want this, what I don't need, I should not want. These are all the restrictions which norms impose. Family norms, social norms. We don't buy a big car because our relatives will feel small. They will feel jealous. These are all normative values, which is completely blasted by individualist economics. And now, in 2005, the G20 nations first came out with an announcement. This one-size-fits-all model will not work. Will you believe? G20 nations in October 17th and 18th, the G20 nations finance ministers and central bank governors meeting in Beijing passed a statement that this one-size-fits-all model will not work. Each nation will have to work out its own model. Have you ever heard this in India? Have you ever heard any economist talking about it? Have you ever heard any economic department discussing about it? Then in 2008, the World Bank came out with an announcement that this one-size-fits-all model will not work. It is very difficult for an institution like us to say because they have been saying it for 50 years, 60 years. And each nation will have to work out its own model depending upon its culture, its traditions, its values. This is precisely what Kautilya said. Life is normative. Life is cultural. Life is based on relationship. You cannot have an economic model sans solve this, at least in this country. In 2010 to 2013, the United Nations series of discussions in 2013, it came to the conclusion that this one-size-fits-all model is completely wrong and culture has to be the foundation of economics. Has anyone discussed this in India? Only in 2015, on the 2nd of January, when the Niti Aayog was constituted in the place of the Planning Commission as the think tank, the cabinet passed a resolution that you cannot transplant another country's model into India. You have to think of what works in India and for India. It has to be a Bharatiya model for development. It is not that the Niti Aayog has done great work on that. At least the government recognized the change that was taking place in the world, that there cannot be one size for the entire world. You have to think of your own model based on your own way of life, your own culture, your own relationships. This was incorporated. Of course, it remains a secret even today because the media doesn't discuss about it. intellectuals do not discuss about, because they are only looking at what Wall Street Journal writes, what the Economist magazine writes. So this has reversed. This one size fit all model, which right from Chanakya to Mahatma Gandhi to Deen Dayal Upadhyaya and great thinkers, they have all said this will not work. You are different. Everybody is different. Nobody is the same in the world. Their food is not the same. For example, take India. The meat consumption in India is only 5%. India has the largest cattle population in the world. That's why. In America, it is 128 kilos per head. In India, it is only 5 kilo per head per year. In a Muslim country like Bangladesh, it is only 5.5%. In Pakistan, it is only 6 kg. In Pakistan, it is only 10 kg. But if you look at South Africa, it is 180 kg. Completely. Food habits destroy animals. You have to grow animals for food. Here you save animals. There is a relationship between animals and man in our economics. Does our economic department think about all this? What do we need animals for? Not for eating. We need animals for various purposes. And we are the largest producers in the world because we don't consume our animals. If our per capita meat consumption rises up to the level of America, there will be no country which can produce, slaughter animals and give you. So there is a cultural foundation to the economics. There is relationship between man and nature. So we must understand all this. And now we have come to a stage where there is a complete collapse of one size fits all model for 4 reasons. The rise of Trump in America. Trump may have gone. Trumpism has become a durable economic model for America. Whatever Trump said, whatever Trump found, China's growth is going to be dangerous to the world. Biden is doing it. American manufacturing is important. We have to protect our jobs. Biden is doing it. And the whole policy of accepting Marx and market mix with which China rose, destroying the world market by its authoritarian domestic policies, which were not transparent. What China is doing within China, no one knows. They are able to sell goods cheap outside. How they are doing it? How they are subsidizing their industries by their manufacture? No one knows because the data is not available. It is an autocratic society. America has been begging for the last 20 years, be transparent, be transparent. You can see any amount of studies. America found that a Marxian state can never be transparent, but it can play havoc with the market in the world. So there is a conflict between Marx and market outside, but there is an alignment between Marx and market inside China. As a result, the entire process of globalization has been distorted. This was the opinion of the trade representatives of both America as well as Europe, which resulted in ultimately the WTO declaring that China is not a market economy. China said, how can you say we are not a market economy? The moment you accepted me in WTO, I am a market economy. But all the countries joined together and said you are not a market economy because you are not transparent. How can a Marxist society be transparent? So it is completely wrong of America to have encouraged China to play havoc with the world market. With the result, it has acquired economic power, it has acquired political power, it has acquired ambitions to rule the world. With the result, what America accepted, one nation, two systems, that even Taiwan can go to America, that has been completely reversed. Now, America wants to protect Taiwan. America wants India, Australia, Japan to join in Quad to protect Taiwan. To say it is no more Asia Pacific area. It is Indo-Pacific area. These shifts, they are not geopolitical shifts. They are economic shifts. They are strategic shifts. They are economic model shifting. But this is not how we study economics. This is precisely what Kautilya said. Kautilya did not look at economics as an isolated subject. He looked at it as part of the statecraft. He looked at it as part of security, economic security. He felt that if economics has to be secure, there has to be a military power. India did not want military power. In fact, the first Prime Minister of India, when he was approached by the British commander, what is your military policy? The Prime Minister immediately said, we are not used to this military kind of thinking. We are all very soft people. We believe in non-violence. Maybe we don't need an army. This is how India started, because in the great two wars India faced, the two different psyches India has developed. One, the Kurukshetra war, and the other, the Kalinga war. In the Kurukshetra war, Arjuna was in the same state of mind as Ashoka was after the Kalinga war. After the Kalinga war, Ashoka was crying, I have killed people, I have maimed people, I have orphaned people, I have widowed women. I don't need war. The same thought was there in Arjuna. Before the Kurukshetra war, I will kill people, I will maim people, I will widow women, I will orphan children. Krishna told him that in a war, these are all inevitable. You have got to go through the war. So war is exception. And you need army, you need defense, you need power to protect people, to protect economy. Unfortunately, the Kurukshetra war psychology was given up, and the Kalinga war psychology took over India, where India felt that even to have a powerful army was wrong. China taught us you need it. This is the extent to which Indian intellectualism failed. It failed not because of now. You know, when Kautilya said that we need an army, we need an acquisitive warfare, Lobha Vijaya. Kadambari Bana wrote in the 4th century that this man is preaching adharma, because of which in the entire northern India, Kautilya was delegitimized. Not a single copy of Arthashastra was found in northern India because of Kadambari Bana. You will be surprised to know the only copy of Kautilya's Arthashastra was found in the Mysore library of the Mysore king. Otherwise, it would have been lost because it was condemned as adharmic. A soft society could never come to terms with the practical ideas of Kautilya, whether in statecraft or in military craft or in security or in economics. So we need to revisit the entire Kautilyan idea in the modern context. It's a strategic thinker. He was a strategic thinker. He was a security thinker. He was a military expert. He was a cultural expert. He was an economic thinker. So, with the shift of the world from one-size-fits-all model and the post-COVID world order is going to change. The changes were visible even before I say that Trumpism had come, globalization was weakening. Now the global supply chain concept that the world is one village, we are all going to live hunky-dory, that liberal democracy is going to dominate us, market economics is going to be the future of the world, it's all over. We have to think of a very different model. In fact, the very person who formulated the world order after the Cold War, Henry Kissinger, he said, after COVID, the world order will change forever. We are seeing those changes, which I explained to you. So the Western liberal democracy and free market itself is under stress. Only 45% of the Western youths vote in liberal democracy. They have got all rights. They enjoy their life. They don't even participate in the electoral democracy. The Oceania voting has come down from 90% to 66%. In most of the Western democracies, people do not vote. On the other hand, in Indian democracy, the voting has risen in the last parliamentary election to 67%. So, you see, the Western liberal democracies are under stress. Civilizational democracies like India are strong. So, we have to now understand the world from democratic perspective, because the world which is centered on commerce is moving towards democracy. G7 has become G8 and now they are planning G10, D10 based on democracies. They want 10 democratic nations to come together to set rules for the world. So there is a democratic paradigm emerging in the world, in which occupy a very, very critical place. So we have to shift from global to local. This is important. We cannot live away from the world. We cannot live away from India also. So we need a very different economic approach and technological approach, shift from pure technology, economic paradigm based on global supply chain is now becoming a techno-economic democratic paradigm. In the world, 56% of the people live under autocracies. Only 44% of the people live under democracies. Only 13% of the people, 14% people live under liberal democracies. The Foreign Policy magazine, January 2019, wrote, India is the only hope for the world of democracy. Because and they are seeing in the next 20 years, they will all become autocracies. Because to work a democracy, you need a large civilizational foundation. You cannot run democracy based on mere individualism, rule of law, court, police, state cannot run a democracy. There has to be an interlaced relationship among the people, harmonious relationship among the people with a philosophy that keeps the people's mind under check. There has to be a spiritual foundation, which is in India, despite all the efforts to destroy Indian spiritualism. Indian spiritualism has not been destroyed by these political parties, liberal thinkers, government, media. Indian spiritualism could not be destroyed. That's why Swami Vivekananda said, the one thing which is the heart of India is spiritualism. And the nation India, the union of those whose heart beats to the same spiritual tune. This is how Swami Vivekananda defined India. And it is that India which is now a rising India. The world now looks to India. It is not because of any government. It's because of our civilizational values and virtues, our social capital, our relationships, our way of work. This is the country which doesn't need extensive policing, because relationship polices. And all these modern thinkers will say it is social policing, it is this, it is that. How far away our intellectuals are from the mainstream Indian mind, way of life. All this is relevant when you are discussing about Kautilyan economics. You cannot break it down into bricks. You have to look at it as a total architecture. So there is advantage India, and India has acquired strategic skills. It has acquired military skills. It has acquired atom bomb. When India exploded the atom bomb, Bill Clinton said, Buddhist India and Gandhi India has done that. Yes, we were always Buddhist and Gandhi India. Did you respect us? Only because we exploded the atom bomb, you are respecting us today. The world is a world of brutal power. This was understood by Kautilya then, when he met Alexander. That is why he said, your softness will not do, gentlemen. You have to acquire manliness. So he changed the paradigm. We lost the paradigm in between because of Kadambari Bana, because of the Ashokan way of handling. Ashoka did not disband the army. He only gave up wars. But he was projected as someone who did not need an army. The Indian government did not need an army. And we have reacquired that spirit in 1998. The whole world scorned us. They put technology sanctions, financial sanctions, economic sanctions. India withstood all that. Today we are a power. We are a nuclear power. We are a military power. We are an intellectual power. We are a technology power. And we are an economic power. This is because of the people. They were hemmed down by socialism till 1990. The world of socialism freed itself, and the freedom was essentially for India. And so we have now come back to Kurukshetra psychology, moved away from the Kalinga psychology. I am not discounting Ashoka. He was a great man. He was probably the only man who defined for the world what is. That you must go Ashokan edicts. It says you have to promote every worship. You have to promote Vedic studies. A Buddhist is saying it. You have to reward the Vedic scholars. And he also set the limits for religious discussion. You praise your religion, but don't fault other religions. Do you mean to say 2500 years back, you are such a great man who could visualize the limits of a religious discourse which can produce violence? This is the greatness of Ashoka. He never disbanded the army. He only gave up the war because, according to V.R. Ramchandra Dikshidhar, Ashoka's war was an adharmic war because he did not give notice to the other side. Because that's our culture. So, Kurukshetra psyche is back. We are now playing the global game. So Kautilyan thoughts need not be taught. India has changed. Kautilya's thought need not be taught. You have to experience it. By empirical study, every institution has to work on it. And I'm happy that this international seminar took up this subject. And there has been a large participation. And actually, I was told that something like 700 participants registered, and they must have gone through a wide variety of presentations. I would be very happy to tell you an instance which may be applicable here. Came to Pandit, and everybody was looking to Maharishi Aurobindo to show the way because the entire India was in darkness. The revolutionary movement had been crushed. And so everybody was looking to Maharishi Aurobindo that he may show the way. But he was looking to an illiterate mystic called Kullachami. Kullachami was a madman. He used to laugh, he used to cry, he used to throw stones. So everybody was surprised that this great intellectual was looking to this mystic for guidance. One day, Aurobindo was sitting and having a cup of tea in the back of his house. Then this Kullachami came and lifted the teacup in front of him and showed it to him. And then he emptied the teacup and then showed the empty teacup and went away. Aurobindo said, I have got my message. People said, what message you got? Aurobindo said, he has asked me to empty my thoughts and begin thinking afresh. That is the message that I have to give you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gurumurthy ji. Wonderful lecture we heard. There is a question in the chat box by Sumit Prakash. Niti Aayog talking about too much democracy in India and is advocating settling even the profit-making PSUs. Now the question is, who will buy these units and what will happen to the normative economic status of the people here? Will this not increase economic inequalities and reverse the economic norm? I request the organizer. Yeah, this is the question.
Actually, is still an economy. is that most of these people, they are working on what has worked elsewhere. But the cabinet has told the Niti Aayog, don't think of what has worked somewhere. Please think of what will work in India. This job Niti Aayog has not done, in my view. So if they say there is too much of democracy in India, it is somebody's opinion. India is a democracy, not today. We are a democracy not because we vote. This question was put to me in 2017 when I was addressing a Hindu Buddhist conference in Japan, in Tokyo, in the year 2017. When a question was put to me, because in Japan they have a way of conducting the workshops. The audience directly ask questions to the speaker. It is the moderator who asks the questions which the audience will have about the speaker. Being from India, the obvious question was about democracy. So the moderator asked me, Mr. Gurumurthy, how is it that India is such a country of great diversity, unbelievable diversity, that it is able to work a democracy? I said, I am surprised at this question. We need a democracy only where there is diversity. If it is an all-Christian society, it is only Robert or Edward who will become Prime Minister. If it is an all-Muslim society, it is Abdul or Jabbar who will become the Prime Minister. We are a country with millions of gods. There was a time when the total number of gods would have been more than the population of India. So we had managed so many gods, and we have managed a bandwidth of idea, for which I gave 3 examples to him. Rama was recognized as the greatest son who obeyed his father totally. He was respected and revered for that. Prahlada defied his father and he was respected for defiance. Sita obeyed her husband, she was respected. Meera defied her husband, she was respected. Lakshmana obeyed his brother, he was respected. Vibhishana defied his brother, he was respected. Please understand the bandwidth of the contradictions that the Indian philosophy, thought, morals, and way of life accommodates. This is what makes us a democracy. We can manage any violent thoughts and subsume it. This is the foundation of Indian democracy. It is not by votes. It's a superior force. It's an ecosystem which our saints, our seers, our philosophers have sustained for thousands of years. So this is how I answered, and that the moderator said this answer will be remembered for a very long time in Tokyo. We must understand our own social and philosophical capital.
Thank you, sir. Now, forum is open to interact with Gurumurthy ji. If anybody is having any questions.
Sir, as you said, Ashoka was having aggressive warfare. But in spite of that, Gupta period is called as golden period. And Ashoka gave up war and he followed Buddhism. Later, his son and daughter, they had this Hinayana and Mahayana. Point number 1. Point number 2, as you said that we are having, instead of the Western globalization, we are having think globally, act locally, and we are into Atmanirbhar Bharat. That's all, sir. Thank you.
Actually, Gupta period is different from Ashoka's period. Gupta was a different emperor. Ashoka was an empire builder. And he built empire by a very unrighteous war. Gupta was not. So there is a difference between the two. Gupta period was, you see, it is not because somebody says it's a golden period. He actually ruled, he built an empire without huge amount of human casualties. The most important thing. And I think in every history and sociology department, you must keep the 9 volumes of Dharma Shastra produced by the Bhandarkar Institute, which has traced the history of how Hindu kings used to build empires, wars. this is something which need to be studied. They are historical instances. They are not mythological. This was done by Pallava kings. This was done by Chola kings. It is as I told you, the Zamari kings wrote a letter to the Portuguese that we don't fight wars in the night. We will beat the drum when we are ready for war, but we will not attack you till you beat the drum in the morning. In the evening, we will beat the drum and close the war. If you beat the drum, we will close the war. This was the rule of war. So we had a very, very different approach. Ashoka first broke that by aggressing upon the neighbor without giving notice. So that is why he repented. In no other country, Ashoka would have repented. Because there is a certain norm which he violated, which made him repent. So Ashoka and Alexander are two different people. Alexander never repented, killing and invading and looting. Ashoka repented. That is because of the culture and philosophy of India. And so far as the next part of your question you asked.
Now, instead of globalization, we have got things globally, act locally, and we have got Atmanirbhar Bharat.
Sir, Atmanirbhar Bharat is a concept which has become relevant in the post-COVID world. If you had, because I have been for Atmanirbhar Bharat from 1990s, but Atmanirbhar Bharat also requires a context in which it will find acceptance. Now, Atmanirbhar America is now becoming a very important phenomenon. America first, American economy first, American nation first, translated to India. That becomes Atmanirbhar because we have to have a global ecosystem in which the national policy will find echo. You cannot have national policy which will conflict with the global ecosystem. So our national policy of Atmanirbhar is in tune with the post-COVID world where globalization is collapsing into globalization.
Your style reminds me of Professor Panchamukhi, Sanskrit scholar. Professor Panchamukhi.
I know him, but he was a great scholar. I am not a scholar.
Thank you, sir. There is a hand raised by CA Panduji.
Sir, good evening, sir. I'm Harpandu, a chartered accountant from Hyderabad. I'm audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible.
Sir,
Yes.
Sir, because you are the director of Reserve Bank of India, the prestigious institution. And
Sir, please don't, because this is wrongly put. I never answer questions on the Reserve Bank.
Sir.
In fact, I never allow my, I didn't see it actually. I never allow my credentials whenever I always say I am a journalist and whatever you can, but the Reserve Bank title I don't accept because that's a functional one. I don't want to talk on behalf of the Reserve Bank.
Sir, whether the finance institutions in India.
Sir, I cannot answer, I'm telling you.
Okay, sir.
Once if you had not called me a Reserve Bank director, I would have probably answered this question.
Okay.
Because if I answer, somebody may misinterpret. That's why.
The reason is the more problem is going on. Finance institutions are lending for wasting money, spending money, but not for earning. They are not giving for industries, farmers, students.
Sir, if you want, I have already written articles. If I want, I will send it to whosoever you say they can distribute it. My views are plain in this. But I don't want to speak because you have put me as RBI director. If you had not put me as an RBI director in your invitation, I would have answered this question.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
No, I'm sorry, actually. I'm not able to answer.
Sir.
Thank you, sir. There is one more hand raised by Vidyadhara B.
Namaste ji. May I ask one question?
Yes.
Okay. I believe in the Arthashastra, at least by custom. I'm not sure I read it with any attention so far. Grain, at least in the economy, grain produced by the farmer was currency, or at least it was approximately an equivalent. Whereas today, currency is issued exclusively by a statutory body, and there are naturally privileges and abuses that come in with that detail. How is it? Is it possible to return some amount of autonomy to the individual?
See, I did a research about what is Karma Yoga in Bhagavad Gita. Karma Yoga in Bhagavad Gita is economics sans currency.
Okay.
Everybody works and he is not getting anything in return. The farmer produces, the washerman washes the clothes, and everybody does their job, but nobody gets anything. Come on, you have done this. Nobody. But they all wait till the harvest is there, and then it is divided among the people. So Krishna keeps on saying everybody must work, and that is the only way economy will be sustained. And he says, I need not work because I don't want anything. Even I work because if I don't work, others will stop working. And that being the currency, the economy will collapse. And so the common kitty into which all put their work is called Kamadhenu, and that is giving returns to everybody. This I assumed as economics sans currency. Once currency came, adharma came. So if somebody can accumulate currency, how much grain one could accumulate? Nothing. But you can accumulate currency which can buy the grain of 10,000 people. So currency shifted the economic power. We have to live with currency. Once you become an urban society, we had urban experience, but we never built an urban society. We had millions assembling for Kumbh Mela. Afterwards, we will go back to our villages. But the Western civilization brought millions and put them in one place called city. So urbanity is an experience. It is not a way of life. But once you have accepted it as a way of life, all the wrong consequences of it you have to live with.
Thank you, sir. Anybody is having any doubts or any questions?
No, don't create doubts if they don't have any.
You were referring something like Marxian economy cannot be transparent. Could you just provide more insight on that?
Marxian economy cannot be, Marxian state cannot be transparent. In fact, if you read Deng Xiaoping and the Transformation of China, this is a book written in 2013 or 14 by two Harvard economists who did extensive research into how Deng Xiaoping transformed China. In the first chapter, if you go through, Deng was only pleading with all his deputies, civil servants, please give me the true data. Because everybody was cheating the other within the system by wrong data. Because there is no check, there is no media, there is no parliament, there is no public discourse to find out who is telling a lie and who is not telling a lie. So the Marxian system functions in secrecy. That's why, that fellow who disappeared for 6 months, nobody knew where he was. But in India, can it happen?
That's from China.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you one. Alibaba.
Jack Ma.
Jack Ma. One more thing I'll tell you. You know what Amartya Sen got the Nobel Prize for? Amartya Sen compared the Great China Famine, in which 30 million people died between 1957 and 1960. 30 million people died. The news came out only in 1978 after years later, 3 crore people died. He compared, Amartya Sen compared it with the famine in Kalahandi. One person will die of famine. The parliament will stop in Delhi. Food will be airlifted for Kalahandi. He said, this is what democracy does. Democracy is transparent. Communism is completely secret. How can communism work a market economics? This, the West was so foolish. They didn't understand and put China into market economy. And China was not there was not an individual company or promoter. The entire China became promoter. The entire China became businessman. And most of the investments in China in business was done by the Chinese army. Himself, Chinese official. So communism can never be transparent because it doesn't allow any free discourse.
Thank you, sir. We will move ahead. Now I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor M.V. Alagwadi, to deliver presidential address. Professor M.V. Alagwadi. Sir, if I am audible, please unmute your mic. I hope he may be busy. I request Professor Pushpayam Savarthi to deliver presidential address on behalf of our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Pushpayam Savarthi.
I saw Professor Alagwadi joined, but may not be able to hear.
Yeah, he told me he will be in meeting, but he will attend the program.
Yeah. So my video is not, I'm unable to on it, but am I audible?
You are audible, ma'am.
Yeah. Hello? Hello? Am I audible?
Ma'am, you are audible.
Yes, yes. Yes, Professor, you are audible. Speak, please speak. Hello?
Yeah, if I'm audible, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Audible.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Murthy. Pardon me if there is any network connectivity problem. First, I'd like to greet Sri S. Gurumurthy ji for having accepted our invitation and enlighten us on Kautilya Arthashastra and Kautilya as a thinker, as a philosopher, as a strategist, as a pragmatic leader who everything about kingdom or civilization. So you write it out that we adopt policy versus non-pragmatic policy, then we end up in problem. This government proved one thing, that China could be also be told, or clear signal can be sent to China. This was a clear in to protect your integrity, sovereignty, and China. It is the one, I think, you highlighted how important it is, and we in the Central University of Karnataka want to have a Arthashastra and Kautilyan thoughts towards this. And it is a very important effort the Department of Economic Studies and Planning is doing, and you have graced this valedictory, and your address is really thought-provoking. I'm sure all of us would be benefited by this, and we promise we'll try to make it as a reality in the Department of Economic Studies and Planning and in the Central of Karnataka, that we really learn principles of economics, principles of military, principles of finance or taxation, all that we had because of our civilization, which in the process and in this our effort, your talk was very important, and really thank once again for time for us, and we look forward to in future also your guidance and support. I managers for making this a grand success and giving an opportunity to very audience. This is the first in the first national workshop wherein 700 plus in the
Thank you, sir. I request Professor Pushpayam Savrathinam to give the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. It has been, as said by our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sri Gurumurthy's lecture was very thought-provoking and eye-opener for economists, especially because what we have been teaching all these days is based on Western economics, right? So the model that we are teaching to our students is not applicable to the Indian context, and he very rightly pointed out. So we need to go back to our roots and try to change the entire teaching of economics at university level, because it is as he said, normative economic thinking is required, which is the foundation of our economics. And our context is different from Western context. So based on our values, ethics, culture, we need to build the policies, we need to build the economic models. And this is the responsibility of all our economic teachers in universities. Sir, your talk was very thought-provoking, and I assure you that definitely we will look into it, and we will try to contribute on the lines you have suggested, which was completely acceptable, because even in India, as you said, each state is different and each region is different, and we need regional models also, local models. So, and from the last 3 days, the workshop was is very successful. We got different aspects of Kautilya Arthashastra, understanding from different aspects, from different perspectives, and it is an eye-opener, and it makes all the academia feel proud of oneself and understand the glory of our culture, our ancient civilization. And one take home for all of us is, now it is the time has come, we have to restore this glory that we have lost in the middle, and for that we have to work very hard. And what is required is, as Professor Sihag said, we have to become Rajarishis to create Rajarshis. Then only we will have that kind of a society wherein there will be transparency, democracy, and values, ethics, and sustainable economic development. So I thank all the resource persons for their wonderful discourse, and all the participants for active participation. And especially, I thank Sri Gurumurthy ji for a wonderful discourse. Sir, we look forward to continue the interaction, academic interaction with you. And with these few remarks, I conclude. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, Dr. Murthy.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we'll proceed for a formal vote of thanks. I request our research scholar, Shivanjali Shukla, to propose vote of thanks.
So am I audible?
Yes.
मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जहाँ चाणक्य जैसा गुरु, चंद्रगुप्त जैसा राजा था। मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जहाँ हर 50 मील पर रूप, रंग, पहनावा, मजहब बदल जाता था। मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जहाँ डाल डाल पे सोने की चिड़िया को पाया जाता था। मैं उस देश की नागरिक हूँ जिसे अपने भूगोल से पहले इस ब्रह्मांड का भूगोल समझ आता था। Namaskaram, Pranam, Adab, Sat Shri Akal, and a very good and cherished evening to all of you. This is Shivanjali Shukla, a research scholar from Central University of Karnataka. It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks for this valedictory program of 3-day e-workshop on Kautilya Arthashastra. I would like to thank most valuable Honorable Shri S. Gurumurthy Sir, Central Board Director RBI, for his presence and enlightening us with the information like normative economic thinking was the foundation. Normative economic thinking was the foundation economics as per the Kautilya, and Kautilya tried to change the paradigm of Indian thinking and the movement from Dharma Vijaya to Lobha Vijaya, and talking about social capital and giving us excellent lecture. And thank you, sir, for blessing us with your knowledge. I would also like to express my gratitude to Professor M.V. Alagawadi, President of the program, Central University of Karnataka, and guest of honor, Professor Basavaraj Dona, Sir, Registrar, CUK, and special thanks to Professor Pushpa Savadatti, Ma'am, Head, Department of Economic Studies and Planning, and the organizing secretary, Dr. S. Lingamurthy, Sir, as without the thought, without the planning, it won't have been possible. And thank you to the academic partner, Samvid Kendra. I would also like to express my gratitude to all the speakers of different sessions, that is Professor Balbir S. Sehag, MIT USA, for introducing us with his book, Kautilya, the True Founder of Economics, and enlightening us with the concepts like Dharmanomics, one-man commission, and how power and prosperity can be achieved by attaining Yogakshema and having Rajarishis, and how Kautilya is the father of economics in the true sense. Followed by Professor J. Manohar Rao, sir, for enlightening us with the canons of taxation and welfareism in Kautilya Arthashastra. I would like to thank Professor Balakrishnan Muniappan from Malaysia for giving detailed explanation of the Kautilyan model of Arthashastra by considering the 5 sutras and bringing to our knowledge that Kautilya begins his Arthashastra with salutation to Shukracharya and Brihaspati, that is the balanced perspective. I would also like to thank Dr. Kumud Prasad Acharya, Central University of Haryana, for giving lecture on Kautilya on establishment of institutions, bureaucracy, movement, and punishment by stating some actual Sanskrit shlokas. Thank you to Colonel Pradeep Kumar Gautam, sir, CMHC, New Delhi, for giving lecture on Kautilya's Arthashastra and relevance to contemporary strategic studies, and how Kautilya's teachings use in strategic vocabulary in every discipline in social sciences. I would also like to thank all the moderator, background team, and the senior academicians and all the participants across the globe for your contribution and patience listening. In the end, I would like to conclude by saying, Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kashit dukbhag bhave, om shanti, shanti, shanti. With this, one of the sutras given by Chanakya, that the ultimate aim of every action is happiness, and us imbibing the information discussed in the various sessions and aiming to prosper as a nation, I would like to thank everyone and wind up the session. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Shivanjali. On behalf of Department of Economics and myself, I owe to Sri Gurumurthy ji. I knew him from 1998 when he started the narration of Indian centric against WTO and globalization. So since then, I'm the follower of Gurumurthy ji. Whenever I find the time, I regularly go through his YouTube channel. So I am the most beneficiary from his ideas and discussions. So I would like to thank him. And again, without the participants, this program would not be success. So definitely, I owe to all the participants from across the country, of course, few participants from the globe. So with this, we'll end up this session here. Feedback form has been shared in the chat box. I request all the participants to fill the feedback, and there are 5 questions to have assignment. So please give the response to all the 5 questions. So with this, I request you all be in touch with Central University of Karnataka. Will engage in Kautilya Arthashastra further, and will bring new formulas where it can be relevant and where it can be executed through Kautilya Arthashastra. Thank you, Vananda.
Thank you, Lingamurthy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Lingamur sir. Thank you very much for organizing wonderful program.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Dr. Manohar from Karimnagar.
Particularly, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful program, sir. I would like to once again join in your university as a PG student to learn Kautilya Arthashastra.
Thank
you, sir.
Thank you.
Under your guidance.
The Manohar sir is there.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm there.
Sir, very wonderful. I have been here, sir, for three days. Sir,
Yeah.
Manohar sir.
Yes.
Sir. Malli, sir, I would like to join in MA Economics to go into deep of the Arthashastra.
Yes. Please welcome. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
You both of you made a grand success.
I request all the participants to find out the researchers who are doing research in the Kautilya Arthashastra, so that we can have the fruitful session physically with limited persons, so that we can have 2 days full engagement on Kautilya Arthashastra in different aspects.
Thank you, Professor Lingamurthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal Singh sir. I request Manohar sir to find out a few persons to have a physical engagement on Kautilya Arthashastra.
Sure, Dr. Lingamurthy. I think it's a very grand start. I think I'll do everything possible to cooperate in this endeavor, of course, and I'll certainly interact with the people physically when possible, or digitally whenever it's, I think I mean, what is a pandemic? This is of such, so we don't know when the physical meeting is going to be possible. So that's what I mean. Otherwise, I'm available to you all through electronic media.
Thank you, sir. From Delhi University, Professor Ramaraj is there. I think he is your friend. Professor Ramaraj from Venkateswara College.
Yeah, Professor Ramaraj made a wonderful intervention in the morning when Colonel Gautam made a presentation. He came with some factual data as well as his own understanding and analysis. I must congratulate Ramaraj for that. Congratulations, Ramaraj. You've done a wonderful intervention in the morning.
Thank you, Manohar. Thank you, Manohar. Lingamurthy garu, Manohar and myself are colleagues in Venkateswara for some time.
I don't know.
We're very old friends.
Thank you,
and
sir.
We'll be in touch. Chala baga chesaru. You've done it. You've done a wonderful job. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thanks, sir.
And please send the recordings of Dr. Gurumurthy and Manohar and other scholars' presentations. Please put it on the website.
I'll share it, sir, and I will put on the YouTube channel all the deliberations which have been delivered in this 3-day workshop.
Yeah.
So I will share to all the participants also.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Dr. Lingamurthy, a grand hippie hooray, and I take leave from all of you, and all the best. All the best for your future endeavors, and I am there with you whenever you demand. Okay. And
Sure, sir.
Professor Razu and others, whoever are present, a grand bye-bye and a wonderful event.
Actually,
I didn't expect
actually,
it.
all credit goes. Actually, all credit goes to our madam, who has the instrumental for making this paper as a compulsory paper in the MA Economics course.
Really, really, certainly, that's a very good attempt, and I think if I know and if my knowledge is correct, I think you are the only university in this country to have introduced Kautilya Sathashastra as a core paper. I think
Yes.
I'm not exaggerating. Probably this is the fact.
Yes, sir. I inquired in all universities. There is no paper as Kautilya Arthashastra, particularly in economics department. There is
Yes, exactly.
different languages, Sanskrit and other languages. But in
Yeah.
economics as a core subject, nowadays.
Like, you know, in the morning session, Kumada Prasad Acharya told that they have a philosophy paper, Kautilya's philosophy paper in Sanskrit, but not in economics. So that's altogether a different grain. But in economics, you know, we have to cast the bootstraps, particularly to relate to the present context. It's not an
Yes,
easy
sir.
task. It's a very tough task. It's a very tough task.
I'm going through a couple of articles of Balberius Sihag, and there is Economic Sutra published by IIM Ahmedabad. IIM Professor Satish Devdar, he has published one book on Economic Sutra.
Okay.
So I'm just going through to understand Kautilya Arthashastra. Of course, it's the first time for me also to go through the Kautilya Arthashastra and to understand in contemporary way, in contemporary literature. So we have to imply those theories into modern economic aspects, economic concepts.
Exactly.
So there it's taking time. So if we have discussion together, so that different ideas come together, we can float some different proposals also in order to understand Kautilya Arthashastra, in order to move ahead in research also.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Lingamurthy. Okay. Ramaraju garu.
Thank you, Ramaraj sir.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Manoj sir.
Take care. Take care. Nice to
Take
see you all. Thank you. God bless you.